Okay, Parsha, where's the share button here? Can we see that?
No.
Okay,
Yes. Yes, now we can.
okay, good. All right, Parshat Pekudei. We are in the final Parsha of Sefer Shmot. So when we come to Shul this week, we'll say Chazak, Chazak, V'nit Chazek, and then move on to Sefer Vayikra, which is its own special challenges. Um, so Pekudei raises, as does the entire second half of Sefer Shmot,
What?
but it
Fish.
it
Fish is failing.
You want it?
it seems to be quite redundant. Pekudei literally means account or records, and literally for the majority of the parsha just goes through telling us exactly what material went into the making of the Mishkan and all the various kalim, all the various vessels associated with it. And so, as you know, there's a lot of questions about why the need for this accounting, why the redundancy. Lots of interesting things are suggested. I wanted to pick up and we'll build towards it, but there's a very interesting um, idea, a theme that emerges in some of the midrashim that really struck me as being quite curious, and we'll see if we can make any sense of it. So just to get us all literally in the parsha with the first verse. Eile Pekudei HaMishkan, Mishkan HaEdut, Asher Pukad Al Pi Moshe, Avodat HaLeviim, Biadi Tamar ben Aharon HaKohen. These are the records of the tabernacle of the pact, which were drawn up at Moshe's bidding, the work of the Levites under the direction of Itamar, son of Aaron the priest. It mentions Betzalel, and then it literally just goes and tells us how much gold, how much silver, how much copper, how much stones, how much wool, and it's really just a laundry list of inventory. So Rashi tells us, "Beparsha zu nimnu kol mishkalei nidvat hamishkan, lakesef v'lazahav v'lanachoshet, nimnu kol kelav l'chol avodato." These are the sums of the tabernacle. In this section are enumerated all the weights of the metals given as a contribution for the tabernacle of silver, gold, and copper. And also there are enumerated the vessels used for every kind of service in it. Okay. Again, we've seen this at least two times prior in Sefer Shmot's description of everything, but we have a third time. Okay, I think we're gonna skip ahead. I guess we'll just go in order. Okay, so one thing that the Midrashic literature asks is why the need, as we said, why the need for this accounting? Why the need for giving us this detailed record of what was involved, what was given for the construction of the Mishkan? So to start us off, we'll pick up with this midrash, which is found in the Geniza manuscript. I couldn't find a more precise source. Rabbi Kasher brings it in the Torah Shlema. Amar Bishmuel bar Nachman, Matzinu b'Torah b'Neviim u'v'Ketuvim, Shadam tzarich latzeit yedei habriot, kederach shu tzarich latzeit yedei hamakom. So he makes this statement that says we find in the Torah, in the prophets, and in the scriptures that a person must be, I don't know exactly how to translate, latzeit yedei habriot, to pass muster with humans, to win the approval of humans in the same way that he must win the approval or pass muster or be pleasing with God. B'Torah minayin. So how do we know this from the Torah? Because when at the end of Sefer Bamidbar, when the tribes of Gad and Reuven want to stay on the east bank of the Jordan River, Moshe says, eventually he acquiesces, he agrees, but he says on condition that you will be the ones to lead the nation into battle in the conquest of Eretz Yisrael and the conquest of the land of Israel. And Moshe says, if you will do that, Vehayitem nikiim mehashem u'misrael. You will be guiltless, or you will be clear before God and before the Jewish people, right? So they have to fulfill this condition that Moshe set for them in order to not have any guilt. Uvinivim minayin, Elokim Hashem hu yodea v'Yisrael hu yada. So it says at the end of Sefer Yehoshua, God, the eternal God, surely knows, and Israel too shall know.
Does this imply um, a way to deal with the issue of whether Haredi B'nai Yeshiva can evade military service in a Jewish country by saying that they have a higher service to do when the military draft is virtually universal among everybody else, and
Yeah, so
it's a big deal.
as you know, any source can be used for any argument. Certainly, that's not that context is not the intention here. Um, you know, can it be used? Yeah, I think it certainly can be used. It wouldn't surprise me if there are rabbis and politicians in Israel that are using this source, or this collection of sources. Um, I think that's taking it to the drash level. I'm not sure that's necessarily the shot of what the Medrash is getting at, but maybe. I don't know.
One of the arguments I think might be from the accounting of the materials, all the materials used in the construction of the Mishkan is one of the guidelines for being an accountant
Yeah,
or an honest business person
for
or
sure.
somebody who's a tailor who's been given fabric or furs or other materials to make a garment.
Hmm.
You're not allowed to, at least I would think, unless the customer is agreed in advance, you're not allowed to take parts of it and keep it because, well, that's a tip that you're allowed to, but you didn't bother asking about.
Yeah,
It
for
amounts
sure,
to
for
theft.
sure, for sure. There's a lot of there's a lot of implications here for business ethics, and we certainly could go in that direction. We're not going to go in that direction, but we certainly could. So uve ketuvim, how do we know this from scriptures? Minayin umatzachim v'seichel tov b'nei Elokim ve'adam. It says we paraphrase this in benching, right? To find favor and approbation in the eyes of God and man. Then the Medrash continues, where from whom do we learn this? Okay, so we have this sort of nice idea in three sources, but where do we learn it from? How do we know that this idea is relevant? We learn it from Moshe. Even though it says of Moshe, God says of Moshe, right? This is in the aftermath of when Aaron and Miriam are talking disparagingly about Moshe and separating from his wife. So God says of Moshe, "B'chol beiti ne'emanu," he is loyal throughout my house. So right, we know Moshe is an honest person. Nonetheless, bikesh latzeit yedei habriot. He wanted to pass muster not just in God's eyes, which I would think would be more important, but he wants to pass muster in Bnei Israel's eyes as well. Shamdam melechet hamishkan amar lehen eileh pekudei hamishkan. When the work of the Mishkan was completed, he takes this accounting. Alachat kama v'kama parnasei hatzibur shehin tzrichim latzeit yedei hatzibur. All the more so that our public leaders must be favorable in the eyes of the public. So it's a really provocative medrash in two ways. Number one, it implies that this Pekudei, this accounting that Moshe takes, is done of Moshe's own volition, right? God has no need for an accounting. God can keep track of things as they come in the first time. He doesn't have to check the cash register later, or whatever the case may be. But right, the Medrash is saying that Moshe felt the need to take this accounting in order that Bnei Israel won't have any accusations against him. And I
Can you
just said the
scroll
second.
down?
Yeah, sorry, yes. And I just said the second provocative thing in this medrash is that, right, Moshe's concerned that that Bnei Israel aren't going to trust him. It's a radical idea. Why would Bnei Israel not trust Moshe?
Did they start trusting Moshe?
When did they start? Did they ever trust Moshe? Right. So that's a right. Maybe they didn't ever trust Moshe. So maybe it shouldn't be so surprising. But nonetheless, I found it to be surprising. If we continue, let's go to number 5. Midrash Tanchuma. We'll pick up in the third paragraph. And again, this is as we often find in midrashic material, there's rehashing of the same ideas or reformulations. Amar Moshe. Oh, sorry. Let me display the English for you. Paragraph 3. Amar Moshe. Yodea Anisha Yisrael Rognimhim. I know that the Jewish people are contentious. Hareini Oselahem Cheshbon Mikol Malachat HaMishkan. Therefore, I will take an accounting of all the donations that were brought for the Mishkan. Hitchil Asot Cheshbon Imahem Ela Pekudei HaMishkan. So he starts to take an accounting, as we see at the beginning of our parsha, where it says Ela Pekudei HaMishkan. V'notein lahem cheshbon al kol davar v'davar. And he gave an accounting, right? The exact number, the exact weight for each and every item. Lazahav, la kesef, la nachoshet, v'kesef ikudei haida, me'at kikar. Right? It quotes for us, right? The Torah tells us how much silver, how much gold, how much copper there was. Okay. אם שהוא עושה חשבון והולך על כל דבר ודבר שעשויים כסדר בתוך המשכן, שכח 1,770 שקל מהן ואבין לעמודים. In his going through all the material that was brought, he forgot about 1,775 shekels of silver, from which was made the hooks that were put on the planks of the Mishkan. Lo hayu nirin, right? Because they're not visible; they were hidden. The Mishkan was attached to the hooks; you couldn't see the hooks. Hitchil omeid tamei v'omar achshav yitzu yidehem shel Yisrael alay lomar shani natalti otam. Moshe starts freaking out. Oh my gosh, they're going to accuse me of stealing the silver. What am I going to do? So he went over again and again what was given. Where did this missing silver go? So God somehow shone the light for Moshe, and he sees the hooks, or he remembers the hooks, and he remembers that that's where the silver went to. He says in a loud voice that this 1,775 shekels of silver was used for the hooks that were attached to the planks. And at that moment, the Jewish people were appeased. And how were they appeased? Because Moshe took such an exact accounting, he was able to ultimately find, a use for every last ounce of silver. Why did Moshe feel the need to take this accounting? HaKadosh Baruch Hu ma'amino. God trusts Moshe, as we've already seen in the previous source. Shene'emar b'chol beiti ne'emanu. As God says about Moshe, he is loyal throughout my house. Moshe natan cheshbon. So why does Moshe have to give an accounting? Ela mipnei she'shama litzanei haTorah shayu misichin acharav. He heard the late Sanim, the scoffers, the scoffers of that generation saying, "V'haya kitzeit Moshe v'bitu acharei Moshe u'mehayu omrim." Right? It says, right, when Moshe, after he gets forgiveness, or in the process of getting forgiveness in the aftermath of the Chet HaEgel, when he would leave the camp to go be alone with God in the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting that was outside of the camp. So it says that they would all look after him. Mehayu omrim. What were they saying when they were looking after him? Right? It seems that it understands that they're looking after him sort of accusatory. Rabbi Yitzchak Hayad Orish L'Shtevach. So Rabbi Yitzchak says they were praising Moshe. V'chaviru Meshivo Reika. Adam shenitmana al melech mishkan al kikarei kesef al kikarei zahav she'in lahem cheker v'lo mishkar v'lo minyan ma'ata rotzeh shelo yeh ashir. But others said, "What are you talking about? They weren't praising Moshe, but rather, if someone's involved in such a huge project with such large sums of money, of course we expect that that person is going to skim a little off the top. Of course we expect that that person is going to become rich." כששמע אמר חייכם משנגמרה מלאכת המשכן אני נותן להם חשבון. So Moshe hears these people speaking disparagingly about him, and he says, "I swear to you, when we finish this project, this Mishkan, I'm going to take an accounting." Kevan shnigmara mar eile Pekudei Mishkan. So when it was completed, it says this is the record, this is the accounting of the Mishkan. Okay, so again, the people are not trusting Moshe here, and it's Avi's not surprised. I was surprised. I'm surprised to hear this. It's not something we would ever expect, given all that we know about Moshe Rabbeinu.
I believe there's also a Rashi when they come to the part about the gold,
Yeah,
that when Moshe saw how much gold they had brought, he realized it wasn't going to be enough. I mean, there's gold involved in every piece of the tapestries and everything. I mean, the yarn itself has gold in it.
right,
That
right,
in and of itself is a huge thing. Plus all of the other, when one really looks through to see where the gold is, it's all over the place. So Moshe himself came forward with the gold. He
Mhm.
he didn't say that he took the sapphire that he was given under his tent to get it, but there is that idea also that he could have gotten more gold somehow. But he contributed significantly himself when it came to the gold.
Right, right.
And there is
Yeah,
a pasuk that says specifically in Shemos that at the sea the people believed in Hashem and they believed in Moshe.
right.
That's not quite the same question that we have, but there is that strong statement there.
What you mean about Hashem over Moshe Abdo, right? So that could be read in a few different ways also, right? That could be they believed in his prophecy and his message.
Was there something about the no pockets or something, so that nobody could accuse Moshe of stealing, or was that just for the Kohen?
Oh, we're gonna get to the pockets.
Okay,
I think that's the next source, isn't it?
could be.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna skip to source number 7, the Mishnah in Shkalim. Shalosh kupot shel shalosh sein tormin et halishka, v'katuv bahen aleph bet gimel. Okay, so when they would collect money for the Mishkan, for the operations of the Beis Hamikdash, they would put the money into 3 different baskets, and they would be labeled. Rabbi Yishmael Omer Yavanit Katuv Bahen Alpha Beta Gamla. Okay, some say it was labeled in Hebrew, some say it was labeled in Greek. Ein HaToim Nichnas Lo B'Pargod Chaputz V'Lo B'Mitznah V'Lo B'Sandal V'Lo B'Tfilin V'Lo B'Kamiya Shema Ye'ani. Okay, the one who collects the funds must from the chamber must not enter while wearing a cuffed garment. And not with a shoe, and not with a sandal, not with phylacteries, and not with an amulet, since all these have places in which money can be inserted. Obviously, that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, right?
Right. The concern is that perhaps the one collecting will one day become poor, and people will say that is because of the sin of stealing the shekels of the chamber that he became poor, as they will suspect that he stole money and hid it in those places. Right. Or it also could be that people become rich, and they'll say that he became rich from stealing it. Right, and so you say this is true even this is true even for someone who's trustworthy, and as we saw in the first medrash earlier on in our shir, that person has to has to be favorable in the eyes of humans in the same way that he's favorable in the eyes of God. Shene'emar vayiti Hashem u'Yisrael. Yomer u'mitzachin v'tzeichel tov v'nei Elohim v'adam. It quotes two of the psukim that we saw already. That when Moshe talks to God in Reuven, that they have to be pleasing to the eyes of Bnei Israel and to God. And as we find in Mishlei, so you will find grace and good understanding in the sight of God and of man. The Yerushalmi Talmud, commenting on or elaborating on this Mishnah, says as follows. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman b'shem Rabbi Yonatan. Batorah v'ketuvim matzanu sh'adam tzarich latzeit yedei habriot k'derech shehu tzarich latzeit yedei hamakom. We find in Torah, in prophets, and in scriptures, again echoing the first medrash, that a person must pass muster with humans in the same way that he passes muster with God. Torah minayin dichtiv v'item nikimi Hashem Israel. In the Torah, the same verse we saw, it says that you should be clean in the eyes of from God and from the Jewish people. V'neviim minayin dichtiv el Elokim Hashem hu yodea v'Yisrael hu yeda. The same pasuk from Yeshua that we saw earlier. And in scriptures, the verse in Mishlei, to find favor in the eyes of God and of man. Gamliel Zuga Sha'al Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Bun. Ezo hamechuzar shebechula. So the way that's commonly translated is, he asks, well, which of these three verses is the most compelling or is the strongest argument? You have, right? Well, which if you could only choose one, which verse would you choose? Amar le v'item nikim me Hashem u'Yisrael. The answer is that you should be clean in the eyes of God and of the Jewish people. Okay, very nice. It's a very nice teaching. Right? Question: is this strict halacha? Is this eitzah tova? Is this good advice? Is this going right? Is this an instance of going lifnim mishurat hadin, beyond the letter of the law, in order to avoid any questioning? So a lot of interesting questions that could arise. But the Ravid in source number 10, I couldn't find a digital or a printed, for that matter, source. So I just gave this summary from Rabbi Sabato's book. So I translated it the way that the Korban HaEdah, the way that most commentators translate this, the question, Ezehu HaMechuvar, which is the clearest, which is the best source here. But the Ravid reads it differently. The Ravid understands the word Mechuvar to have a slightly different meaning, and argues that Gamliel Zuga's question in fact signifies which is the most stringent of all, which is the most machmir, connoting what is the most stringent requirement in the Torah. Ravid interprets Rabbi Yossi's reply as meaning that the requirement to be guiltless in the eyes of others is the most stringent of all. That this is a chumrah, that Moshe didn't have to take an accounting of the Mishkan, of all the materials, that the Kohen or the person in charge of the tzedakah collection, the Beis Hamikdash, could have gone in and wearing pockets or wearing somewhere else that money could be inserted, and no one would have thought any the less of it, or maybe someone would have, but right, this is a chumrah. This is a stringency. Rabbi Sabato goes on to say that sometimes this stringency might actually be a kula bali de kula, a chumrah bali de kula, that it might lead to leniencies in other areas, and that's an interesting. He has a whole interesting take. There's a copy of his book available in shul for anyone who's looking for some reading during shul, not during the rabbi's speech, but any other time. You have my permission. Anyway, he has an interesting take on it, that maybe this is really a chumrah, and this isn't teaching us something to emulate, but it's sometimes taking things a little bit too far. I'm going to pause and see if there's any questions or thoughts so far. Any Any reactions to what we've seen?
I had a question
Yeah.
going back a bit to when you were talking about gold.
Yes.
I was wondering recently, after the Cheta Egel, when a whole lot of gold went into making the calf and then got ground and
Yeah.
consumed. So was there more gold? That
Right.
had exhausted the supply of gold that the Bnei Israel had with them.
So
Uh-huh.
that's a really interesting question. That gets us into the whole meta issue of which came first. So that's a
Right.
huge machlokas, right? Was the Mishkan given only in reaction to the Chet Egel as an atonement, and maybe there never was um, going to be a commandment to build the Mishkan until Bnei Israel sinned with the Chet Egel, in which case, um, they didn't give all their gold to the Egel. They saved some. They saved most of their gold maybe, and then had it when the command came. For the position that says that the command to build the Mishkan came first, and that the Mishkan might have as a secondary function some sort of kapara, some sort of atonement for the Chet HaEgel, for the sin of the golden calf, but really, as the Ramban says, it's meant to perpetuate the Har Sinai experience. It was always intended to be part of the Jewish camp and part of what God wanted for us. Um, so we know that when they took the original collection, that once they got what they needed, they said stop, right? They said
Right.
don't give anymore. So presumably they still had what to give to the for when they decided they were going to build an Egel, they still had wealth. I don't know what the exact amount of gold was, but it's not crazy to think that they had more gold because they were told, "Stop bringing the gold, stop bringing the precious stones. We have what we need for the Mishkan." So yeah, they had a lot of gold. Right. So you're right. Most in that measure, some put it to the Yam Suf when the Egyptian soldiers drowned and all the chariots were adorned with jewels or whatever floated to the top of the sea, or they took it from the Egyptians during Makat Choshech, or they found it during Makat Choshech during the plague of darkness, and on their way out, they asked for their payments for all the years of hard work. So yeah, they had a lot of gold. They had a lot of wealth. Um, Right. I think we in previous years we
Right.
explored
Thank
the
you.
question of where some of the other materials came from, most notably the seal skins. That's not something you find in the desert or, as far as I know, even in the Red Sea, the Nile. I don't know where the seal skins came from, but yeah, they had a lot. But it's a good question. Thank you.
Well, I thought that we also had reviewed this before, that when Aaron is speaking to Moshe and they're talking about what happened and all, that Aaron said, "Yeah, well, go ahead and get some, get what you want to make this," and thinking that he would be delaying them because the women wouldn't give up their gold.
Right.
And
Right.
that, in fact, was the case. And so that the gold that they had to work with for the golden calf was one thing. But there's a point made when they bring forth for the legitimate making of the Mishkan, that the women and the men came together so that the women could give their gold, and the
Hmm.
men could see that they were giving their gold and so on. I
Right.
don't know all the stories connected with that. But I was just thinking that if one just looks at compares, say, how much gold was given by comparison with how much silver was given, that there's a big difference between the two. The Rebbe translates it into modern terms by an approximation, I suppose, of some sort. But the gold that was brought was 3,000 pounds, but the amount of silver is 10,000 pounds.
Yeah.
And the amount of copper, let's see, where is that one? That's 70 shekels, whereas the silver was 1,775 shekels. So they're not all the same by any means, but yeah, I don't know. It's a little hard to know how to put all these traditions together, isn't it?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
I saw just riffing on that for a second, and I saw an interesting take. Bitzalel is mentioned again in Parsha Pekudei, so
Mhm.
I think it's in the context of Parsha Pekudei that I saw this, but we've spoken about Bitzalel and how it's remarkable that he was able to do what he did, and all the craftsmen working with him, and the Ramban makes the point that it's even more remarkable because yeah, I'm not artistic at all, and you work with jewelry and stuff, so you can understand better than I can. But the Ramban makes the point that a nation that was working as slaves, built making bricks and laying bricks and constructing pyramids or whatever. So not only were they not trained in fine jewelry making and silversmithing and goldsmithing and whatever, but in fact, it's kind of the work that they were doing in Mitzrayim was anti the jewelry making work. That
Yeah,
to make
really.
to make the
Well,
jewelry,
it's
you have
true.
to have really fine, delicate hands, and they were doing really, really basic, rough labor, and getting all sorts of calluses and blisters, and so it was even counter to being able to work with these fine metals. So it's even more remarkable. And so I saw someone make the point that when the Torah tells us about the various vessels of gold and silver, okay, so we can understand that gold is beautiful in of itself, even if you're not the greatest craftsman. If you have some nice gold and you do anything with it, it's going to look good because gold always looks good. And silver also,
This is true.
you don't have to be such a maven to make the silver look good. But when it comes to the choshet, when it comes to the bronze and the copper, which is nothing special. We use copper to make pipes to conduct water, right? To make the copper look good. That's how we really study that Pizzalo was very special. So I
Mm,
thought that was a nice
hmm.
take on things. But that's
Wow.
an aside.
Hmm.
Um, Okay, so I wanted to look at this really interesting explanation here from Zalman Soretsky. We've quoted him before in the Oznaim LaTorah. So he asked the question that we've all been asking: why does Moshe feel the need to take this accounting? Nimtzu nigrarim shechashdu at Moshe shnitasher b'masei mishkan. So there were complainers or scoffers who were accusing Moshe that he got rich from his involvement in the Mishkan. Lefichach amar Moshe bo v'naseh cheshbon. Therefore, Moshe said, "Okay, I'm totally guiltless, and we can take we can go and make an accounting, and I'll show it to you." Then he asked a really interesting question, which also segues with what some of the comments we just heard. Aval b'maseh ha'egel shemikol hazahav shnatnu yatzar rak egel katan lo darshu cheshbon. Beatrice, you just asked, what about the Chet Egel, the sin of the golden calf, where they gave however much gold they gave, and all that came out was this very small egel. He makes the point it was only an egel and not even a shore. He couldn't even make a bull. It's only a cow. It was only a heifer, and it wasn't very big. So how come they didn't demand of Aharon to make an accounting and accuse Aaron of having stolen the gold that they gave him for that project? Midazeh zu nishara b'tochenu. And this trait remains with the Jewish people to this day. Shemigabei dvarim shebigdusha dorshim tamid cheshbon meduyak. When there's someone collecting money for tzedakah, someone collecting money for the shul, for the yeshiva, for the day school, for the bikur cholim, we expect them to be able to count for every last penny that's collected, and to be able to show that they're nothing's being used inappropriately. Aval mimikvatzei zahav v'kesef la'egel, but when someone's collecting for an egel project, for a non-holy, anti-holy project, ein dorshin ve'ein mevakesh cheshbon. No one asks them to give a proper account. Nira lila tam lazeh. So Rav Zalman Sorotskin has the following suggestion, explanation for why this is the case. Shenukuda pnimit shebelev haYehudi, haratzon ha'amiti shelo hu lasod v'tzon kono. A Jew's inner point, inner desire, is to fulfill God's will. And he points us to the Rambam, a very often quoted Rambam in Hilchot Gerushin. We know that if a couple is getting divorced, um, that the husband must give the get to his wife of completely his own volition, and that leads to controversy, question, right, with the Aguna crisis, and questions about is the halachic prenuptial legitimate? Is it not legitimate? But the Rambam says very famously that if a husband refuses to give his wife a get, then the Beis Din is able to literally beat him up, to give him lashes, until he says, "Okay, I'll give her a get. Stop hitting me." The Rambam says, "How does that work? How is that possible? He's forced. It's clearly against his will." The Rambam says because really every Jew wants to do the halachically correct thing. Every Jew wants to do what God wants of them, but we have a Yetzer Hara that gets in the way of it. So by beating this recalcitrant husband up, we're helping him to realize his true desire, his true intention. It's a very beautiful Rambam. So, but the Zalman Tereskin quotes turns to that Rambam to show that we know a Jew always really wants to do what's the right thing. וכשהוא נותן כסף על משכן או דבר טוב אחר, רוצה הוא באמת שכל פרוטה פרוטה תלך על המטרה הקדושה. So when a Jew gives a donation to the Mishkan, some other holy project, they really want every penny, every last cent to go to that holy elevated endeavor. That's why it's a lot easier to find someone to donate the Aron Kodesh than it is to find someone to pay the electric bill every month in shul. Right. So they want to make sure that every last cent is going for that holy purpose and not for something mundane. In order that it should be a true merit for that person. Aval but when his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, entices him to give to some unholy project, such as the Egel Hazahav or something else mundane, unholy, undesirous, nafsho alav te'abel b'pnimiut taliv al shavar ratzon kono ve'eno makom. Then even though he's giving money and he says he wants to participate, his heart is really troubled and pained by the fact that he's going against God's desire. So if the Nevi'im, the prophets, the leaders of this unholy project will take some money off the top and put it into their own pockets, so in the end, at least the person's neshama will be happy about this because less of his money is going to some unholy project. And so his sin is less severe than it would have otherwise been. And so therefore you'll have less of a reminder of his sin. So he says very interestingly that that this accusation against Moshe comes from a very holy place, right? It's sort of like a kedusas levi, sort of like always finding the best side of the Jewish people, always being their advocate. So even when they're talking disparagingly about Moshe, they're saying so from a place of really wanting to do what's good and what's right, that they had such a strong desire to participate in the Mishkan and the holy project that they wanted some assurance that really every last penny went only for the most elevated, the most holy purpose. And so it's a nice teaching. And whether there's any truth to the fact that if you give to an unworthy project, I don't know. I've seen people get very meticulous with that also, but it is a nice idea, and yeah, I guess it is. I like the premise of his question. Why did they not complain against Aaron? Why come you gave us such a small egel? So it's a nice thought. Okay, one more idea about Moshe and the and why he felt the need to give an accounting. And this brings us to Bezalel, whom we just mentioned in response to what Anne said. Right, so we said our parsha mentions Bezalel. Bezalel ben Uri ben Chor Matei Yehuda Asar Kol Asher Tziva Hashem et Moshe. Okay, Bezalel, we know it was involved and one of the leaders in the Mishkan project. When we're first introduced to Bezalel, back in chapter 35, Parshat Kitisa, I think this is from Kitisa. Vayomer Moshe el bnei Yisrael, Ru'u kara Hashem b'shem Bezalel ben Uri ben Chor l'matzeh Yehuda. So Moshe says to the bnei Yisrael, see that God has called out and designated Bezalel ben Uri ben Chor from the tribe of Yehuda. Yimalei oto ruach Elokim bechachma b'tfuna uvedat uvechol melacha. And God has filled him with the Spirit of God, with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge, with all sorts of work. Lachshov machshavot, lasot bazahav, vakesef v'nechoshet, to have proper thoughts in order to work with the gold, the silver, and the copper. Uvacharoshet even, lamalot uvachoshet eitz, and to carve stones and wood, uvachol malachet machshavet, and every other work in the designer's craft. Okay, so Bezalel is given all these amazing skills. So it's said, it's pointed out by many people, but one of the greatness of Bezalel, and I'll just take what I was able to find in Rabbi Hochbaum's book, which we've seen many times before. There are two types of leaders in history. One type of leader is the thought leader, as we saw with Bezalel, lachshov machshavot. Men and women who have the imagination and capacity to generate great visions and pioneering ideas that can reshape the future of their communities and indeed civilization itself. Regrettably, these leaders often lack the personal skills and administrative, technical, and logistical abilities to follow through and translate their visions into reality. In contrast, there exists another kind of leaders, not dreamers or thinkers, but doers. They are the builders of institutions and people who give flesh and substance to great ideas and dreams. Their strength is in making things happen. In 3 words, the Torah describes Bezalel as the rare leader who could do both lachshov machshavot, to possess grand visions, and then la'asot, to have the capacity and ability to bring them to fruition. That unique quality, combining these 2 dimensions of leadership, is a prime prerequisite for the builder of the Mishkan. So Bezalel is someone who not only has the great vision, but he's someone who's able to bring that vision into reality. We might say that the same is true with Moshe and the Mishkan as a whole. The Torah tells us at the end of our parsha, Vatechel kol avodat Mishkan ohel moed. All the work of the Mishkan was completed. Vayasu b'nei Yisrael kachol asher tziva Hashem et Moshe kein asu. Bnei Yisrael did exactly as God had commanded Moses, so they did. Perhaps the lesson or the message that Moshe is trying to impress by taking this account isn't necessarily that anyone was accusing him, isn't that anyone thought badly of him, but maybe it was to show Bnei Yisrael, look, we had this vision and we made it happen. That the accounting is saying we took all the raw parts, all the raw materials, and we made the Mishkan just as God said we should make a Mishkan. We didn't deviate. We followed the blueprints exactly. There's no scratched whatever, right? Everything came out perfectly, just as we envisioned it. And so maybe the point of the accounting of Moshe is to impress on Bnei Israel just how amazing and remarkable it is that they had the plan and they carried the plan out to perfection. And that's something that is not so easy to do, and something that shouldn't be taken for granted. maybe that was the message that Moshe was trying to impress upon them.
Hmm.
That's my take on
Very
it.
good.
Any,
I like
Oh, yeah, I do too. Yeah, that's really good. It fits in very well also with the unusual phrase. The first time it occurs, I understand that the Mishkan is an edut.
Mhm.
It's a testimony, and some would say it's a testimony to Hashem's having forgiven them.
Right, right. So
So
that gets back to the question we addressed with Beatrice about when the command was given.
Mm-hmm. So that if they really put everything into it themselves, it shows that they feel that they are forgiven.
Okay, okay, I hear that. There's a lot. The Sfat Emet talks a lot about that, about the nedivus, the voluntarism that went into it. Um, I'll share one more thought, and that thought is that oftentimes when you're when you're in the middle of the campaign of collecting the materials, or even the construction, it's very easy to get caught up in your Dalit Amos of whatever your responsibility is, right? So the woodworkers or the stone hewers are in the quarry cutting up stones, and you say, "What are you doing?" They say, "I'm cutting stones because that's what Moshe said I have to do." And it's very easy to get to lose sight of the fact that there is some bigger project involved. So while the project is going on, when you're in that construction phase, right, you have to maintain that vision of what this is all going to. Not just I'm hewing stones, I'm cutting wood, I'm sewing fabric or weaving or whatever, but I'm helping to build a Mishkan, I'm helping to build a Beit HaMikdash. Once it's complete and you have the beautiful building, you have the beautiful shul, you have the beautiful structure, so then it's very easy to forget about all the smaller steps that went into it. And so maybe part of Moshe's accounting also is to remember and impress upon Bnei Israel the importance of recognizing all the contributions, not just the monetary contributions, but the working contributions as well, um, that got them to this point, right? Not just to take for granted that we have this beautiful Mishkan, but to take a step back and appreciate all the little steps and all the little contributions that on their own may seem insignificant or inconsequential, but did come together in order to make this beautiful, successful project. So there's a lot to learn from it. Again, it started out with a midrashic tradition that sounds a little surprising at first, that they would accuse Moshe of stealing, of not being honest, of not being straightforward. But I think that there's some beautiful lessons to be learned when we unpack it a little bit. All
The
right.
last things you said transition beautifully into the question of how each person builds their own Mishkan.
Yes.
But it's like you're saying that every act of kindness, every tiny little thing is really part of this big, beautiful project itself. And it's good at night when one does an accounting to just see the positives too, you know.
Most
So
definitely, most definitely, and the beautiful. I always think of it as a Shalshuda song, right? Bilvavi Mishkan Evne, that I'll build a Mishkan in my heart in order to glorify God. So beautiful way to end it. Okay, on that note, have a great rest of the week, everyone. Looking
Thank you
forward to
so
being
much, Rabbi.
back in
bye.
Shul on Shabbos, and next week, Sefer Vayikra.
Whoa. Okay.
All right,
Wow.
all right. Have a good night.
Thank you too.
Oh, thank you so much.
Laila Tov, everybody.
Lila Tov.
That's how